Cooper and Aziza Francis, thank you very much for joining me. Jackie.
It's been described as the most ambitious public inquiry ever launched in Britain, and some are now beginning to wonder whether it is an ambition that will ever be realised. The resignation of Dame Lowell Goddard means the independent inquiry into child sex abuse has lost its third chairwoman in just 2 years. She's now been summoned to appear before MPs to explain her decision, as Jane Death reports.
As Home Secretary, she set up the abuse inquiry. As Prime Minister, Theresa May is inheriting a legacy of failure, according to the third chair to quit, Dame Lowell Goddard. Personally chosen by Mrs May as perfectly qualified and suitably non-establishment. She said leaving family behind to head the inquiry had been incredibly difficult. But some who've taken part in the process think there's more to it, with talk of tension inside the inquiry.
All I know is there are 3 heads of inquiry who have been pushed or resigned. That's a devastating effect on people.
Raymond Stevenson spoke to the Goddard inquiry on behalf of hundreds of people who say they were sexually abused in children's homes in Lambeth in South London. After yet another false start, he believes someone doesn't want this inquiry to get off the ground.
Dragging out the inquiry, making it unpalatable, making it uncomfortable, making those victims relive the nightmares and then putting them on hold again is part of the cover-up. And you could smokescreen it by saying the work continues, but actually the flag bearers to those campaigns, the people who are supposed to deliver justice, are not there no more.
It is becoming the inquiry no one wants to lead. Baroness Butler-Sloss stood down after a week after questions about her late brother's role as Attorney General. Dame Fiona Woolf took up the mantle, but critics saw her as too establishment too. Theresa May then went outside the country, appointing New Zealand judge Dame Lowell Goddard. Now she too has resigned from the inquiry, saying,
"Compounding the many difficulties was its legacy of failure, which has been very hard to shake off. And with hindsight, it would have been better to have started completely afresh. While it has been a struggle in many respects, I am confident that there have been achievements and some very real gains for victims and survivors of institutional sexual abuse in getting their voices heard."
Home Secretary Amber Rudd says this will continue without delay in the absence of a new chair, but the inquiry has been thrown into crisis. Richard Scorer is acting for more than 50 victims giving evidence.
This is hugely disappointing and frustrating, particularly for victims. This inquiry was set up in 2014. We're now in 2016. We haven't even got on to the main hearings of the inquiry, so to lose a third chair is extremely frustrating and concerning.
Even as the inquiry into institutional abuse and cover-up stumbles, for the first time, a comprehensive picture of the scale of abuse in our society. Asked by the Crime Survey for England and Wales, 7% of adults said they'd been sexually assaulted as children. That's 1 in 14 of us. The figure 1 in 14, are you shocked?
I wasn't shocked by the figure, but I was saddened by the figure, that we are still dealing with such a high level of sexual abuse in our society. And I worry that the recent resignation of the third chair of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse in 2 years sends a message that child sexual abuse is just too big a problem for our society to solve.
MPs have asked Justice Goddard to come and explain why she's resigned. But who's left to replace her that victims will trust and who'll want the job?
Well, earlier I spoke to Lucy Duckworth, a survivor of abuse herself, who now sits on the Victims and Survivors panel of the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse. I began by asking her whether the inquiry needed to be refocused.
The magnitude of this inquiry means that it will take a very long time for it to get set up and achieve what it must achieve. I think there's quite easily a misconception out there that this inquiry is just looking at the abuse that happened in Westminster or the abuse that happened in BBC post-Savile, and that's just not true. We're looking at schools, military, care homes, churches. It's huge.
But how long do you think that's all going to take? I mean, you clearly said it is going to take some time. When do you think we will finally see a conclusion?
I could not possibly comment on that. I mean, that's very much down to the legal teams, and that's not my role at all.
What's your best guess, though? I mean, we're talking years and years.
So they have said that it would take 5 years. For me personally, what it takes is what it takes. It must take as long as it takes.
Did Justice Goddard do her very best, though? Was she professional? She had 3 months holiday, reportedly. There's a year gone by, no evidence taken. I see some reasons for that, but was she really her very best?
She did, but it wasn't her inquiry. I don't know about the holidays and all the criticism that is being said. Whatever Justice Goddard's legacy, it was that she has set up this inquiry. She has made sure that Victims and Survivor panel was listened to. She has made sure that the Truth Project has been set up. She has done that with her colleagues, and those colleagues remain in place. There is not one person that is in charge of this inquiry. It's a panel-led inquiry.
Justice Goddard has now admitted that she was the wrong person for the job in tendering her resignation. Was it then a mistake of the then Home Secretary, now Prime Minister Theresa May, to appoint her?
Our current situation is we have Theresa May as Prime Minister, who was personally committed and set up this inquiry. This morning I met with Amber Rudd, our new Home Secretary, who reassured us personally that she is entirely committed to this inquiry.
But Theresa May personally picked the wrong person.
Theresa May set up this inquiry. It's a biggest inquiry ever in history. Mistakes are likely to be made. There is no blueprint to go from.
You yourself speak from personal experience.
I do, yeah.
How important is it to you personally that this inquiry succeeds?
This isn't about our personal stories. This is about the overarching picture, which is without this inquiry, we cannot seriously tackle child abuse and make the changes in law that must happen if we are to keep our children safe. And I think there are many, many people that would fight to the very end to see that happen.
Well, we're joined from Glasgow now by Ian McFadden, who's a survivor of abuse and now a campaigner, and from Leeds by Labour's Shadow Home Office Minister, Sarah Champion. Ian McFadden first, how much of a blow is this to you personally?
Personally, this is devastating. I and many other survivors have invested ourselves and our lives in trying to ensure that an inquiry would be set up and would be fit for survivors' purposes. We have fought hammer and tooth over this, and so I am actually really beyond disappointed. I'm so angry with what's happened here.
And who are you angry at? Are you angry at Justice Goddard or at the Prime Minister, who was then Home Secretary, who appointed her?
I am angry. I'm angry that obviously if Justice Goddard was fit for purpose for this role, she would still be in place. So Theresa May has to bear some consequences for this. I'm angry that the largest public inquiry, which is funded by taxpayers' money, about some of the most horrendous crimes that have occurred up and down our country over decades, that the chair feels that it's fit to resign and announce her resignation the way she did last night. I find it a real personal insult, to be honest with you.
What can restore your confidence in this inquiry now?
Do you know, I have survivors saying to me, is this being done purposefully to just grind us down to the point where we just walk away from this? You know, I would like a chair of the inquiry who has the resilience, as much resilience as myself, a survivor, and other survivors out there. You know, we have suffered horrendous things that happened to us in our childhood, and we struggle to overcome that and deal with it daily. My expectation is that if we employ somebody to chair an inquiry that is to look into failures of institutions that were paid to look after children, that person has a bit of resilience and a bit of backbone and can actually sit up and give us an inquiry that is fit for survivors.
Who would you like to chair it then?
Well, it's not. My opinion is negligible. You know, survivors have asked for in the past for Michael Mansfield. You know, we've put that name forward to Theresa May in the past. Survivors in the past have asked for an inquiry running along the lines of Australia, the Royal Commission. That was disregarded. So, you know, personally, I think we need somebody who survivors feel that they can trust and has demonstrated that they will go the distance with regards to inquiries. And I think Michael Mansfield, for me personally, would be my choice.
And he tells us he would offer his services. Sarah Champion, I mean, you've heard there from Ian just how angry he is. What can be done now to get this inquiry back on track, if anything?
Well, I completely understand his anger, and it's shared by many survivors that I've spoken to as well. People have given an enormous amount of their time, but also their trust to this process, and I can understand completely why they're so disappointed. I mean, for me, the most important thing is this inquiry has to keep going forward. You know, for years, people have been coming forward and really trying to help and support by giving their most, you know, horrific stories that have been disregarded for years and years. They have given them to this inquiry, and if we lose the evidence that they've submitted now, we will be doing them a massive disservice. So for me, what I need the government to do is get someone who has got the backbone and who will see this through.
And should the scope be narrowed? Should it be redrawn, this inquiry?
I think that's the biggest problem from the very beginning. It is, well, the government gave the inquiry an almost impossible task, which is to look at, investigate and get justice for past child abuse. Now, the ONS survey yesterday showing that 14% was saying that they had been abused. I still think that number's quite small. The scale of this is colossal. But the other thing that I want people to focus on is that child abuse is still going on now. It is prolific in this country, and we must be doing much, much more to prevent it, as well as getting justice once the crimes happen. But for me, a crime is a child whose life has been decimated, and we need to be tackling both of these things.
While you're here, I just want to ask you about a different subject. You quit the Labour front bench, saying that Jeremy Corbyn's position was no longer tenable. You then changed your mind, asked for your job back and got it back. Did you simply calculate that his rival in the leadership contest had no chance?
Anyone that knows me knows that I'm not very good at politics. What I'm very good at is campaigning to give a voice to voiceless people. So for me, once I realised that the will of the PLP, the members of Parliament, wasn't behind Jeremy, he couldn't be a leader. You can only be a leader if you've got followers. So I resigned at that point, and to be honest, I expected him to resign as well. When he didn't, I then looked to my bigger duty, which is to my constituents, but also we are the Queen's opposition. And it's for things like talking to you today. You know, I want to make sure that in my portfolio of preventing abuse, that people have got a voice. You know, there is someone in there fighting to make sure that they can go forward.
Do you think you'll be the first of many to, as one of your detractors put it, crawl back to the front bench?
I'm proudly at the front bench because I'm giving voice to people who suffer abuse and who suffer domestic violence. Whether or not other people follow is entirely up to them. I mean, we are all individuals. People don't realise it, but we're actually all self-employed, not employed by the party. So I think everyone is making a very personal choice at the moment, and that's something that I respect. But mine is definitely to be the Queen's opposition and to hold this government to account, because to be quite honest, at the moment, there's a lot of people that need some support and they're just not getting it.
Yeah. Sarah Champion, Ian McFadden, thank you both very much for your time.
Thank you.
Jackie.